Welcome to the Empower You podcast. Empower You Network is a kingdom-centered movement based in Milton Keynes, United Kingdom, that does three things: empowers, transforms, and awakens. These podcasts are designed to enable you to reach your fullest potential and operate in every sphere of life at the highest degree possible. Let's go and join the latest session at our Academy. Hi there, it's Otis Pinnock here, Senior Leader of the Empower You Network, and welcome to the latest session at the Empower You Academy. It's based here in Milton Keynes, United Kingdom. So great to have you here. So great to have you here. We have a lot to get into. But before we do that, I just would love to be able just to recap. We normally do this anyway, especially with regard to the series that we're doing at the moment called Building the Future Now, or Building the Future. And I really would encourage you to tune in or listen to the first three parts of this series that we've recorded, so at least you can get a flavor of where we're going and what we are attempting to do with the series of messages. Now, just before I move on, just to let you know that we are part of a network and we have our own app and our own media. And one of the things that is actually encapsulating all of these messages, one of the things that is really centering all these messages, should I say, is literally our drive towards nation building. So on all our messages across our apps, nation building is really at the core of what we're doing. And I'm going to be honest with you, it is really at the core of what we're doing here with this series. So welcome to part 4 of the Building the Future series here at the Empower You Academy. All right, so we're going to get on and give you a little bit of a recap, especially with regard to last week. We were looking at the building of the wall in Jerusalem, taken from the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. I hope I haven't butchered his name, bless God. I think I'm speaking in tongues right there, but all right, he was a king of Persia, the dominant superpower at that particular time. He had a very trusted role, and that was being a cupbearer. And due to the series of events, he was sent to Jerusalem to rebuild their walls, which were in a state of decay and in a real bad state due to the wars that had taken place years before, and they had never ever been repaired. In fact, they were still in ruins. So Nehemiah was sent. He had a burden to actually build the walls, and he was sent, and he was financed and resourced by King Artaxerxes, the king of Persia. So he arrives there into Jerusalem, and he faces a few oppositions, and he begins to face an enemy that didn't want to see any form of progress where the Jewish people were concerned. So we had a look last week at some of the tactics that were used to discourage the building of the wall. And not only that, but to literally stop it dead in its tracks. So we had a look at these strategies, but we also had a look at Nehemiah's countering strategies, or Nehemiah's tactics that put pay to some of these strategies. And what it did was it actually enabled him to move things forward. So last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the strategies that were used by their enemies, Sanballat and Tobiah in particular. And these guys were leaders. They were governors in their own right over their own regions. But a lot of these two leaders were natural enemies to the Jewish people. But they were leaders, and they had tremendous influence. So one of the things, once they found out that the wall was being built and they started to build the building, they resorted to providing or at least introducing to the project team discouragement, through mockery and ridicule. Strategy 1. Strategy 2 was in terms of intimidating the workers by threatening war. And then last week, we began to talk a little bit about, once you start a project, that one of the things that can derail a project, in particular of this size or any other project, is the fact that that there can be at times internal issues that can hinder the progress of the project. So we looked into all of these things, but one of the things that I really want to highlight in terms of finishing this time of recapping is simply this, was that for every one of those strategies, there was, and we'll repeat, there was a tactic that Nehemiah put into place, a very strategic man, a very tactical man, that enabled them to overcome these setbacks or overcome the strategies of the enemy. For example, the first major tactic or strategy of the enemy was to bring discouragement through ridicule and mockery. Nehemiah prayed and increased his prayer life and increased his prayer output, but also made sure that he carried on with the project regardless, almost using the mockery and the ridicule as fuel to get on with the job, as it were. The second strategy of the enemy, we're talking about Sanballat and Tobiah, was literally to declare war. If you continue to build this building, we are going to intimidate you by threatening war. Okay? We want to cancel this particular project. And one of the things we talked about last week is that so speaks to today's society and today's era in terms of cancel culture. You step out of line, you come against the political orthodoxy of the hour, and then we will cancel you or kneecap you in that particular sense. And we've seen it done with the Parler social media app and with others too. We've seen this thing done. In other words, you are not going to report these news. You're not going to build these walls because we want to intimidate you. And one of the things we discovered about intimidation is that what it wants to do is to scare you and to frighten you to do what the enemy wants you to do in the first place. Stop any form of progress or stop any form of future building. And I'm going to say this, that if you, and I'm speaking to leaders and ministries and businesses, etc., if you're looking at the future, if you're looking at a brighter future, I'm going to say this to you, when you start working towards building that future, you have to expect the enemy to come against you. It's just going to happen. So what we've done is taken nuggets out of the book of Nehemiah and present them to you. So as you go ahead in terms of building your future, you know full well that the enemy is going to come against you, but you are going to be smart and strategic like Nehemiah. And what you are going to do is put not only the supernatural aspects in terms of increasing your prayer life, but you are going to put natural and practical measures to ensure that the project continues or that you are building your future. So after the second major threat in terms of intimidation, he said to himself, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to get armed guards and we're going to guard the walls. We're going to guard the project. And not only that, but what we're also going to do practically, we are also going to have a watch. So we're going to have a watch around the walls of Jerusalem just to check to see if these enemies are going to actually start a war. The truth of the matter is that Nehemiah had the king's authorization to do so, and these leaders were governors in that particular sense. Now they could have caused a minor skirmish, but the point is, if they decided to go to war, it would have been really, really in the long term very, very detrimental to them. If you actually read into the geopolitical scenario at the time, but nonetheless, he increased his levels of prayer. I'm talking about Nehemiah, but he employed tactical measures that countered the threat of the enemy. Okay? So what we're going to do now is literally start at strategy number 3, despondency. Despondency. And we're going to have a brief look at what despondency actually means. Just bear with me. Okay, going to have a look at what despondency actually means. Hold on one particular second. I'm just going to get it. Here we go. All right. The definition for despondency, strategy 3, is the quality of being unhappy with no hope or enthusiasm. So you're totally despondent. What would cause the building project of the wall of Jerusalem to and the workers and the team to become despondent? We're going to have a look at this. One is, and I've alluded to it before, it's simply because of internal issues or internal project issues. Now, again, if you're planting a church, starting a business, releasing a new service, no matter what aspect of future building that you are doing, there will always will be, how do I put this? There will always be unexpected issues, unexpected internal issues that can come. And as I said in last week's message, it could be resource problems. It could be conflict within the team. It could be conflict with suppliers. It could be situations that you have no control over, macro situations to do with the government, for example, Brexit, or in the United States, a change of administration and a change of focus that makes what you're doing a lot more harder to do in terms of government legislation. Regardless of what it is, it will come. The question is how are you going to deal with these things and be able to keep the morale of your team as high as possible? Because these things can cause despondency, and despondency to a degree can actually pause the progress, or should I say, pause the level of momentum that's been built up prior to these unforeseen circumstances. So what we're going to have a look is what actually caused this level of despondency. What series of strategies, what series of events cause a level of despondency? We're going to look into this right now. According to Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10, and Judah said, the tribe of Judah actually said, or the workers in Judah actually said, the strength of the bearers of burdens is decayed, and there is much rubbish, so that we are not able to build the wall. This was an unforeseen circumstance or unforeseen situation that Nehemiah had to face. He just didn't have the resource to deal with the rubbish that had been caused not only by the renovations of the wall, but also caused by the ruins of the original ruins, etc. They just didn't have the ability to deal with the rubbish that that accumulated as a result of building this particular wall. And to make matters worse, the enemy, at many times when this is all going through, another tactic begins to emerge itself. And now watch this. So Nehemiah's hearing all of this particular issue, and now we are dealing with another strategy of the enemy, which to a degree actually paused, I'll say it again, paused the progress and the building of the wall. The next strategy is literally called deadly conspiracies. So imagine you're doing a project right now, but your enemies are threatening to kill you. Now, beforehand, we talked about Tobiah and Sanballat planning, saying to the Jewish people at the time, listen, stop building, otherwise we're going to go to war. This time, this particular conspiracy wasn't in the open. It wasn't in the open to say, get ready for us. We're going to come and fight you. We're going to war over this particular war. Now, they said to themselves, no, we're going to keep it secret. This is what we are going to do. And let me just get into this before I get into what they were planning to do. Let me just begin to give you a definition of the word conspiracy. And it simply is this: the activity of secretly planning with other people to do something bad or illegal. So in this particular sense, an activity of secret planning with other people to do something bad or illegal. So what was happening? Let's go to not Deuteronomy, Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 11 to 13. And it says these words, and this is the conspiracy that their adversaries said. Watch this. He said, and our adversaries said, they shall not know neither see till we come in the midst amongst them and slay them and kill them and cause the work to cease. So in other words, they were looking to get into the city, okay, and begin to start attacking the builders and the laborers directly, incognito, not as an army, but as a series of lone wolf attacks or guerrilla tactics to actually stop the building of the wall. So they'll come into the city and say, look, I've come here to trade. I've come here to see my cousin. I've come here to see my family member. Or I've come here to trade or visit for the day. But secretly, they're carrying weapons, and they was literally saying to themselves, we're going to come in secretly. And then what we're going to do is, as the laborers are going to work, we are going to attack them and kill them. No, we're not talking about injuring them. There was a definite threat, and there was a definite conspiracy. Very similar to our day today. For example, I've talked to you about cancel culture that is so prevalent in our times. But let me tell you something. Cancel culture cannot come without a degree of conspiracy. There's got to be people that that are targeting you, or targeting certain individuals, targeting certain movements to make things difficult, in terms of future building or in terms of moving forward within their own project. What you find is, what I love about the Bible is that, technology may change, eras may change, but guess what? Human behavior doesn't. It doesn't change. It doesn't change at all. Human behavior doesn't change, and human activities don't change. It's just the era that we're in. So in Nehemiah's time, he had to be dealing and managing this particular situation. And it came to pass, watch this, that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times, from all places when you shall return unto us, they will be upon you. Therefore, I'm not going to say what Nehemiah did. But basically what was happening is, this news, the only reason why this news came out was because Jews in neighboring areas were actually hearing what these guys were planning to do. Okay, the Jewish people living in neighboring areas began to hear what their enemies were up to, and they came and reported what they had heard to Nehemiah. And this is what I love about Nehemiah. He could have stayed frightened, he could have stayed fearful, he could have said, listen, maybe this building this wall isn't a good idea. But what you've got to see, he was committed to building the future now in his era and in his time. And not only that, but he was also able to counter the enemy. And I want you to see something. He didn't play nice. He wasn't the nice little Jewish boy or nice little Christian that won't respond and that won't bite back, or at the very least bare some teeth and say, listen, you trouble us, we're prepared to bite you back. Why? Because at times, the future that you're building requires warfare. It requires your response. You're not going to get away with building something in this era without a degree of warfare from someone. It's just, or something. It's just not going to happen. You've got to be prepared to fight back. What did he do? He said, therefore said I in the lower places, a strategic mind, behind the wall, and on the higher places, I even set the people after their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. Okay? And their bows, should I say. So in other words, what he was saying was, listen, I began to arm the people. It's not that we're going to go and start looking for people or start looking for their enemies. They're basically saying, okay, if you're going to come, I have a little something for you. I'm of Jamaican descent. And what we would normally say, come now. What that means, come, I have something for you. Well, you're going to come and try and kill me and there's not going to be any sort of repercussions? Are you crazy? That's just not going to happen. And this is why I love him at Nehemiah. He said, listen, I'm going to have to arm my builders. I'm going to have to arm these families. And that's exactly what he did. You know, him being in his particular position, authorized by the king, he was able to resource the Jewish people with weaponry. And to make sure they guard the vulnerable areas where there could be potential attacks from their enemies, and began to guard the families with swords, with shields, and with arrows. Okay? So in other words, they met deadly threat with deadly threat. And I bet you bottom dollar that if there are any enemies that came in and saw these things, if they did come in and see these things, let me tell you what would have happened. They would have said, uh-oh, boy, if I attack one of them, I might lose my life. So I want you to understand this. You know, I'm not advocating violence. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm actually trying to say is that Nehemiah's tactics neutralized the threat. I'll say it again. Nehemiah's tactics neutralized the threats. And I'm going to encourage you, not only looking at the opportunities of what you're building and the future that you're building. Yes, you've got to look at all these opportunities. You've got to look at all the strengths, but you've also got to look at the weaknesses, and you've also got to look at the threats too. It sounds like I'm talking about a SWOT analysis, but that's exactly what I'm doing. You've got to gear up and begin to strategically think about how you can minimize the risks, or how you can minimize the threats, not only to the project, but also to the resource that you have. And that also includes people, and also includes money. Okay. All right. So we're getting through this. Fantastic. Fantastic. I hope you're enjoying the message so far. So dealing with deadly conspiracies, dealing with the fact that there was potential despondency. And now on top of that, now there's a threat, literal lethal threat to your lives. Oh my goodness. You can just imagine the negativity swirling the team. But again, we're having a look at Nehemiah's tactics. And he said, unlike these threats, the previous threats, these threats weren't open, but were made in secret gatherings around the region. I've explained that before. Okay, and we've just explained that this conspiracy was made outside the region. It was the Jewish people that lived outside the regions that notified Nehemiah of it. Okay? Right. And in verse 15, as a result, and it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, everyone to his work. And it came to pass from that time forth that the half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held their spears, their shields, and their bows, and their habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. What does it mean, the rulers were behind the house of Judah? We're talking about the representatives of the Persian government were behind the Jewish people, were supporting the Jewish people in the work. And they which build on the wall, and they that bear burdens, were those that laid it. Every man with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand he held a weapon. Okay, watch this. As I said to you before, Nehemiah organized and strategically positioned his project. And he done that by arming them. And not only did he arm them, he actually had a meeting and said, listen, we've got to fight for our families. He's literally saying we have to fight for our future. He had a meeting because what he was dealing with wasn't just dealing with the despondency, but he was probably dealing with the real threat and the real fear that these families had for their own lives. And I want you to read this. He said, when you begin to read Nehemiah chapter 4, he said, Nehemiah saw the despondency and the fear in response to set up armed guards to protect the vulnerable part of the wall. He also armed the laborers with weapons to protect themselves if attacked. He held a meeting with the local leaders, people of influence, and the rest of the people and issued a warrior's cry. We have to fight. This isn't coming easy. We've got to fight. And he mobilized that team and he weaponized them and mobilized them, not only in terms to fight, but also in terms of building. You've heard this said before, but we are in a season of war and building. And this story, this account in the Bible begins to show us that there is a time to build and there is also a time to war. As I've just said, it's quoted in the scripture, they had materials to build with one hand, and they had tools to build with one hand, but in the other hand, they had a weapon to protect themselves. In other words, this project needed warrior builders. Needed warrior builders. 100% important. You can't have builders that are not going to prepare to fight for the future you see. You can't have a team that are not prepared to fight for it. You know, it's amazing. I've been in the church world for quite some time and in the business world for quite some time. But let me just say this to you. It's kind of amazing that people can join with you when things are going great. But sometimes when things are going wrong, those self-same people can turn their backs on you. You do not need ordinary people or even skilled people in this season. You need warrior builders, warrior strategists, a warrior-minded resource that are prepared to fight for the future that you are building. Are you getting what I'm saying? It is time for warrior builders. Warrior builders. Let's get into this. We've just got a few more minutes to go of this session. I hope you've enjoyed this session. Nehemiah obtained weapons for the builders and their families, organized and armed them. He also had the backup of the occupying military and rulers in the city. The builders were weaponized and became warrior builders, builders who were prepared to fight and build at the same time. This gave the team focus to return to work and counter the threat of the enemy. And I'm going to say this, that warrior builders were needed in that season. And I'm going to say, as we're building things for our nation, as we're building a brighter future in our respective nations, then warrior builders are needed right even now. Boy. And it's my prayer, as you are hearing these series of messages, but there is a future to fight for. I know things look bleak, but there is a brighter future to fight for. And I believe that brighter future lies and resides deep down on the inside of you, or lies and resides in the prophetic information you've received, lies and resides in the plans that God has given some of you and you've dusted it off because the pressure got too great. And I'm going to say this to you. It's time to fight. It's time to fight for your future, because I believe that the brighter future our world desperately needs is lying on the inside of you. It's time for warrior builders. Are we prepared to be weaponized? Are we prepared to be mobilized and build a brighter future for our respective cities and families and nations? Listen, it's Otis Pinnock here, your host. Thank you for tuning in. And there will be more coming from this particular revelation next week. God bless you. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in and facilitating our mandate to empower, transform, and awaken. We would love to hear from you. Get in touch using the following information. Website www.empoweruglobal.com. Email info@empoweruglobal.com. By telephone 01 908 766 287. Follow us on social media: Facebook, Empower You Network, Instagram, Empower You Global, YouTube, Empower TV Network. Or why not join our growing community by downloading the Empower You app? If you have an iPhone, please visit the App Store and download the Empower You Hub app. And if you have an Android phone, please visit the Google Play Store and download the Empower You Network app. Thank you. God bless.